Hello, this is Nicholas Briggs, and you're listening to the Sirens of Audio.
G'day audiophiles, this is the Sirens of Audio. My name is Dwayne and I'm joined, as always, by Philip. G'day.
G'day Dwayne, good to be here, good to hear you all around.
We've got Nabil Shaban coming up very shortly to talk about many things, but the reason I invited him onto the show was because he'd been getting a lot of recognition with the real-time pictures production done by Keith Barnfather of Syl and the Devil Seeds of Arador. So I thought, well, that's a good excuse to get in touch with Nabil and talk to him about some of the Big Finish work that he's done. And he says, it's been such a long time since I've worked on those, that's just a day of work in my life. But he said, I can talk the hind legs off a donkey, but the fans may be disappointed with my recollections of the Big Finish stories, but I assured Nabil that we had plenty of interest in other things that he had to say. So we're going to have a listen to that shortly. But let's just cover the Big Finish stories that he did do. So the first one was a release of the Lost story from the season 23 that was never made. Called Mission to Magnus.
Coming soon from Big Finish Productions. Doctor Who, The Lost Stories. Mission to Magnus.
Oh, this is where the evolved live, where the wonders are, the magic, the knowledge of 1,000 years of time travel experience.
Does not disruption, destruction, the bloodshed of war between two worlds merit intervention from the Time Lords?
No, it doesn't.
Doctor, we're not on our own. Look.
Another TARDIS?
You, Syl, are not to be trusted. You must join the rest for execution.
I am to die? No more, Syl! No!
This TARDIS has moved us forward in time. We are seeing Magnus as it will be in the future.
Devastated. Blasted. Destroyed.
Doctor, you have thwarted our plans before, have you not?
Once or twice. I'd rather like to do it again.
At last we triumph. At last our race has a home. Now we can arise and conquer.
So this was probably the second Lost story that was released after the Nightmare Fair with the Celestial Toymaker. And Philip, I'll go to you first. What were your impressions of that story?
Well, of course, the whole season was one of those interesting things where all the fans were interested to know what would have happened. Of course, with the whole time period, they decided to, even though the entire season had been commissioned, the first couple of scripts had been written, the decision was made to scrap everything after the hiatus. And so fans were always interested to know what would have been. And certainly Mission to Magnus was certainly one of the ones that we were most interested in because it had the Ice Warriors coming back. And one of the things that we had wanted for a long time, the fans, was Ice Warriors. So I think we were all very curious to hear what's going to happen. And of course, it's being produced in lots of ways because we had the book as well. So I guess it's one of those ones that we were keen to see what Big Finish did with it. Their approach was, however, to stick to the traditional. So they actually didn't change much. I mean, they actually had Philip Martin actually came and did his own script, revised his own script for the radio play. And I must admit, in the end, I think I'm glad the fact that they didn't make it as a TV series, I think it still showed all the issues that they had with Colin. I think a lot of the problems they had with Colin's first season, a lot of them were addressed when they came back to the trial of the Time Lord. And so you could see Colin and Nicola were working really hard to make the changes themselves as the scripts didn't let them. But Mission to Magnus really harped back to all the problems that they were having, I think, with that first season of Colin, in terms of just not really sure where the Doctor should go. And the whole plot idea of meet an old friend, or in this case, another Time Lord who we're supposed to, the Doctor's supposed to know really well, but we've never heard of before. So there's a lot of plot devices that are very common to the Colin era. And I think the thing that strikes me the most was just how, I guess, the sexism of the story in terms of really got me. Now, it's obvious that all the cast and production people realised that that's what it was like. They, in the extras, they comment on it. But yeah, a lot of the story stuff is really good, and it's certainly worth listening to as a period piece. But I don't think it's like a Big Finish story. It's obviously still a television story, and I think Big Finish has done far better with what they do. What did you think, Dwayne?
My thoughts were that I'd heard it many years ago, and I re-listened to it before we spoke to Nabil just to get my head around it, and I wasn't too worried about the so-called sexism that was in the story, but it wasn't really pronounced until right at the end, and then I went, I got a bit of a twinge there. The sexism was pretty full on, and I can see where in the story people had that bad taste in the mouth. Also, the Ice Warriors, they're fantastic in Big Finish. However, in this story, because I think it was kept very true to the time, I don't think Philip Martin, and I think that was the whole philosophy of the Lost Stories, was to recreate them as they would have been back in the time that they were written. Yeah, I think Philip Martin was given a brief at the time. Write this story. We want Syl and we want the Ice Warriors. So Syl being Philip Martin's creation, he was very happy to do that. But it seems to me in the story that the Ice Warriors were just plonked in there. And they didn't really have too much to do with the plot. I mean, it wasn't really necessary. And if the sexist ideas were handled in a slightly different way at the end, I wouldn't have had a problem with it. But because of the way they were handled, yeah, I can see why people were getting a little bit upset. And I think it's just something that probably should be left as almost, shall we say, a museum piece. It's something that's of interest, but it's not something that I don't think too many fans would go back to as sort of one of their favourite Big Finish stories, for instance. Certainly isn't for me.
Yeah, as I think the Lost Stories have a place in terms of showing us what could have been, but it's a bit like watching this, in the special features at DVDs and watching the cutout scenes. Very rarely do you see a scene that's being cut and you go, "Oh, that should have been in there." They cut the scenes for a good reason, and I think with the Lost Stories, the fact that they weren't made, there's a good reason why they weren't made. And so, even though they enlightened us a bit in terms of what the thinking was like, they're a historical curiosity for us. I think there's a good reason why it wasn't made in the first place.
Yeah, but it is good that we've got it, and I'm glad Big Finish did it. It gave us the opportunity to have that, and to have Nabil Shaban come back as Syl, such a great character from that first Colin Baker full season, was really good.
Yeah. And I will say that I do think the Seventh Doctor and Rain stories, the Lost Stories, when they were trying to reproduce what Sylvester's next season would have been like, a lot of them are excellent. So yeah, I don't write off all the Lost Stories, and so I don't write off this one either. To be honest, I mean I think Nabil does a great job as Syl. I think Colin and Nicola are doing a pretty good job. There are children in the cast. I'm always nervous with children. But yeah, I think I'm glad we have it. But yeah, I think we're about to talk about the next Sil story, and that surpasses this by so much.
Yeah, so the next story was Antidote to Oblivion, but that wasn't a Sixth Doctor and Perry story. It was a Sixth Doctor and Flip story, which was very interesting. ComCorp, I think, was the name of the company. So, yeah, still using some of the names and terminologies that we got from Vengeance on Varos, and Sil is doing some wheeling and dealing and up to some schemes on the planet Earth. And there's also a character in there that I don't really want to spoil, but it does tie into the TV episodes. The other character that we've got in there. Is she credited as? Is she named in the credits? I can't remember.
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Yeah.
Certainly when I was listening to it, I don't think she's, because as we listened to the story, it was a surprise.
Yeah, but
I'd forgotten. I'd forgotten it when I listened to it last week. I'd forgotten from the first time I listened to it, and I went, "Oh, actually, that is, yeah." It was a good link. It's clever.
Yeah, I really like the way it's linked into Mind Warp. And very, very interesting themes. When was this done? About 2012, was it?
Yep.
Something like that. And some of the story relates to events that are happening in the world today. Like I've said that about a few stories lately, that you can tie them into the way things are happening to the world today. But yeah, a much, much more enjoyable story than Mission to Magnus. It wasn't constrained by the Lost Story brief, so plus it was something that was brand new that Philip Martin could use. I think Sil was the main villain of the piece, so Ice Warriors weren't having to be squeezed in there, and I think it was a very enjoyable listen. So the thing with the Sixth Doctor and Flip is that I've only come to really like Flip as a companion since she joined forces with Constance. So Constance and Flip as the TARDIS team I really enjoy, but Flip on her own, I always personally found her a little bit irritating. So any stories containing Flip, I sort of not give them as much attention as I probably should have. And I think Antidote to Oblivion was one of those stories that is in that era, I think before main range number 200, just before main range 200, which I'd only listened to once and sort of hadn't concentrated too much on. So it's good to be able to go back and listen to that sort of 150 to 200 in the main range again. And because a lot of them I passed over very quickly, and I think this was one of them, but it's a great story. What about you, Philip?
Well, I was so pleasantly surprised when I went back to listen to this. It would have been one of the ones that I would have listened to once when it first came out, but I haven't really gone back and listened to any of the Flip stories again, and it's actually made me think I need to go back, and often one of the things I love to do is to listen to a whole journey of a character through. I did it recently with Ehrman, the Fifth Doctor's companion. I've done it with Charlie. Actually done it with Charlie a couple of times because I love Charlie. I did it with Lucy Miller recently. So often I'll pick a companion and follow it through. But Flip was never someone who particularly grabbed me along the time. I'm really enjoying her stories with Constance at the moment. And so I've actually warmed to her more recently. But going back and listening to this story, I think I need to go back and do it. But this story was just such a pleasant surprise because it was so engaging. It had so many different elements. Flip and the Sixth Doctor are working so well together. I do think Sil as a character here is working so much better. Mission to Magnus, he was good for 3 out of the 4 episodes. There was a period of time we had nothing really to do in that. But in Antidote to Oblivion, he really has a focus on the point all the way through. And in terms of his corruption, you just can't trust him. And you're never quite sure where he's going. And just the way he flips sides depending who he's talking to. I think Nabil plays him really well. And there's just some very scary things in terms of the situation today, in terms of viruses and drugs and things like that they think about. So, in terms of where we are at the moment in the world, once again, this was a really telling piece for us understanding a bit of where we're up to and the idea of making money, who survives with the vaccine and who doesn't survive. It was a bit scary and a bit dark, but certainly some great ideas, and the whole idea of suppressing a population. So much of what's happening in the world today, this deals with. So I loved it.
Excellent. So our special guest for today is Nabil Shaban, and we're going to play that interview for you in a moment. We got a lot of Nabil's background on his life. Some of it is a bit heavy, but it is a fascinating story. Like, for instance, we were talking recently, Philip, about certain podcasts that deal with actors that we know, that we're really finding out things about these people. For instance, in the podcast David Tennant does a podcast with, finding out these really interesting stories about these people that we know through their acting on the screen, stories that we never knew before. And I think we've got some of those with Nabil coming up.
Yeah, certainly a life full of a lot of tragedy, you'd think, and yet he's really made the best of it. So when you think about, you'll hear soon as he talks about how his early years were spent, his relationship with his parents, what happened there. Really, really tragic, and it could have been the sort of thing that would break most people. But for him, it actually gave him purpose, and his disability hasn't stopped him. His family life hasn't stopped him. The rejection of culture in some ways hasn't stopped him. This is a man who's driven, and certainly had a lot of very interesting things to say. You're going to enjoy this.
Very good. All right, well, let's have a listen to the trailer for Antidote to Oblivion, and then we'll have a chat with Nabil Shaban.
Coming soon from Big Finish Productions, Doctor Who, Antidote to Oblivion.
My request is on behalf of Concorpia. You are supporting not just a corporation, but a country, a nation.
No, Mr. President, no! You have exceeded your credit limit.
We plan further austerity measures.
Only radical cutting will do.
How radical?
A scheme to drastically reduce your parasitical population. Doctor, what a sublime pleasure to meet with you once more.
The feeling is not reciprocated, Syl.
There's things in here with us. Doctor!
Whatever Syl has planned for us, it can only be worse than death.
I intend to break you down, piece by genetic piece.
Doctor,
Flip!
A little trauma? The odd burst of agony? Is that too much to ask?
Even by your standards, Syl, this is despicable. Is there an epidemic?
Not yet.
We must have the vaccine tomorrow at the very latest.
Antidote to what? For what?
Difficult times call for difficult solutions.
Oh, now the readings are fading. They're going to die. Both of them.
Then let the final bombardment begin!
Subscribers get more at bigfinish.com.
Nabil Shaban, it's a great privilege to have you joining us on the Sirens of Audio. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be on your show.
Thank you very much for joining us. Tell me, you were born in Jordan in the Middle East, is that right? How did you end up from the Middle East over to the UK? What's the story behind that?
I was with a congenital disability, brittle bones, and after about 3 years, my parents had had enough, couldn't cope, and somehow or other they were lucky, or my dad was lucky, but he was a friend of King Hussein, and when good King Hussein found out about me, because Jordan at that time had a very good relationship with Britain, he arranged for me to come to Britain because, they believed that I might stand a better chance of surviving and living a decent enough life with a disability than I would do in Jordan. So hence, I was sent to Britain, to London, and I've been in Britain ever since. My parents couldn't come over for a while because my dad was in the army, but eventually he managed to get over to Britain and got a job at the Jordanian embassy, and then soon after that he died, and then my mum disappeared. So that was basically how the situation was for me. I was in the hospital for about 6 years, and then left there when I was 9, and then went to a children's home just in time to watch Doctor Who in '63.
And so you've been a Doctor Who fan right from the very beginning?
From the very beginning, yes. Well, I've actually kind of stopped watching it when I got to university in '75, mainly because at that time all the televisions at the university were inaccessible. They were up steps, and I couldn't be asked to be asking someone to carry me up the steps and down. Although Doctor Who was like Star Trek, very popular with the students at university, especially as the university was a science and technology university. So I wouldn't have had problems finding volunteers to carry me in the chair up and down the stairs. But, you know, I thought, oh, well, I won't bother. And in fact, I didn't watch television throughout the whole time I was at uni. And I didn't start again until, you know, I got my own place and rented a television. The only thing was, at that time, I had so little money, but I had a TV which was paid for by a coin meter. So I'd have to put in 50p, I think, for an hour. So you can imagine I didn't watch a lot of television at that time.
So I was just wondering if you could tell us what you were studying at university.
Yeah, I was doing what was then called a human science degree, which basically involved philosophy, psychology, and sociology. And then in your final year, you can specialize in just one of those or two of those. So I decided to specialize in psychology and philosophy.
Can I just go back for a moment, back to your early childhood? You were away from your parents at a very young age. What was that like for you growing up as a young child? Many children would probably find that difficult, let alone having a disability as well. What are your memories of those younger years?
Well, they were obviously quite difficult. I blanked out most of it, I think. I got a very, like, my time in the hospital, which was like 6 years, and which was spent in a cot for most of that time, and then in a bed for the last year that I was there. I was immobile, really. I didn't have a wheelchair until the last year that I was there. So my companions were fellow kids, but they were always changing. There was no continuity. You know, I might make a friend, and then after a while they disappear because either they get better or they die. There was a lot of death of children at that time. So I got very little memory. In fact, you know, recently, and when I say recently, I discovered somebody, and that was because I'd had some photographs which someone had taken and had given me, and I joined an alumni of staff and patients, former patients of the Children's Hospital, and I'd posted some of these photos. And in the photos, there was me as a little boy and other children, but I didn't know who they were. I didn't know their names. I'd forgotten them. And then suddenly, out of the blue, I got a letter from one of the girls that was in the photo. And, she knew who I was, but I didn't know who she was. I didn't know her name. I had no memory of her whatsoever. And I still feel a bit embarrassed because we've become very good friends subsequently. And that was only a few years ago. But after 50 odd years, we re-established contact. But I still feel a bit embarrassed because I have no memory of her. Yeah, it's clear from the photos that, we knew each other and, obviously liked each other. So my theory is that I was probably so traumatized by losing people on on a regular basis, because it wasn't just children, but members of staff, nurses, and the sister. Well, I do remember the ward sister. She was the one continuity throughout the 6 years that I was there. So I couldn't forget her. And there might have been one or a few other people. But generally, I've got no memory. And I encounter through Facebook various nurses who tell me they looked after me, but I can't remember them. Got no memory of them whatsoever. So, and then obviously when I went to school, I've got, I've kept in touch with quite a few people, and I've got obviously better recall of that. But again, it was always a life in transition. And regarding my parents, well, clearly I kind of rubbed them out. When my mother disappeared after my dad died, I didn't hear from her for quite a long time. And I didn't see her again for about 16 years when she suddenly turned up at my doorstep, in 1982. I think it must have been very traumatic. But happily, I kind of blocked most of it out.
Okay. What led you into a career in acting?
Well, I liked telling stories always as a kid. I used to entertain my fellow either patients. I've got a memory of that, of telling stories to those kids that were close to me physically, in the bedwise. So there'd be a kid on my left, a kid on my right, a kid in front of me. So I might have had an audience of about 6 children, as the ward was long. And I got a memory of me sort of making up stories and acting out. The other thing, of course, was the television. Whether I was near the television or far away, that was the one thing that carried on throughout my time as a child. And it was obviously for a while, I couldn't understand what television was. It's a box with people in it, but they were having such exciting adventures. And, in those days, there was a lot of costume dramas, Robin Hood, Richard the Lionheart, William Tell. And I loved those. That's where I guess my interest in history grew up. So I wanted to be in those things. And when I realized that they were actors and they got to dress up and have sword fights and ride horses, and I always had, I remember always loving animals and horses and dogs. And so I clearly wanted to be a part of that. So that gave me the urge to be an actor, because it's escapism. You're playing other characters, you're being other people, and you're in situations that, you don't normally find yourself in, but it's safe to be doing, it's safe to be a villain because you're not doing any real harm to anyone. It's just all make believe. So that idea was very appealing to me. But I'm a disabled person. I'm in a wheelchair. And in those days, the only people you saw in wheelchairs on television, in dramas, were usually non-disabled actors pretending to be disabled. And they would get up out of their wheelchair or throw their crutches away as soon as they left the studio. So the opportunities for me to be an actor were non-existent. I tried to get into drama school at the age of 16 when I left school, but of course they weren't interested, and just wrote patronizing letters as replies telling me I hadn't a hope, basically. So in the end, I had no choice but to set up my own theatre company with a friend who wasn't disabled, and basically we wrote our own stuff. And to my amazement, within a year of setting up that theatre company, I found myself being offered professional work. But it was all completely unexpected, so I'd had no training as an actor because it didn't exist when I wanted to be an actor. I tried various attempts to get into it. For example, the children's home that I was in, they were very popular with documentary filmmakers. So at least once a year, there'd be a film crew that would come and do something about us. And for some strange reason, I found myself often chosen to be included in the documentary. And I took a great interest in all the workings of making film. And I think at one point I must have been asking a lot of questions of the director and the producer in between takes, so much so that I overheard them talking about me and saying, oh, I think you'd make a great editor, film editor. Of course, I didn't know what an editor was. The closest I knew of an editor was someone who worked in a newspaper. But I decided, well, they think I could be a good editor. Okay, I better find out what a film editor is. So I got a book out of the library and read it from cover to cover and thought, yes, I think I could do that. In a wheelchair, if you sit in an editing suite and running film back and forth and cutting it and so on, maybe that would be a way I'll get into filmmaking and maybe become an actor doing that, because I also, though, wanted to be a film director. So, and I was directing on stage, and although I wanted to be an actor, I was too nervous about actually being an actor. So I would organise plays and try not to give myself any part in it because I was worried that I would enjoy it too much. And I didn't want to be enjoying it if I wasn't going to be able to do it properly and do it professionally. So I kind of used directing and writing as a sort of surrogate for the acting experience. But I was always forced to end up being in the plays because in the institutions, it actually was very hard to find colleagues who would act or be good enough. So, for example, I agreed to do a stage version of Jimmy Clitheroe, who was a comic in Britain, and he was a small bloke, and he had a popular series back in the late 50s, early 60s on television, and someone wanted to do that. So I said, okay, I'll direct it. But I ended up having to play the part of Jimmy Clitheroe because there wasn't anybody else that could do it. So I was a sort of reluctant actor in so many situations. And then eventually, I was almost reluctant about the theatre company that I was helping to set up, but found that for some odd reason, people thought I was good and were offering me work. So, but I always tried to, how I could do it without, I thought if I could become a multimillionaire, create my own theatre company, create my own film company, TV company, and that would be the way I'll get to be an actor because I'm the boss and I'll be in control. So I had very early megalomania, but mainly so that I could get into the entertainment business. But I discovered actually I didn't have to go all that way to do it. There were easier ways without becoming a capitalist bastard and a Trump-like character or whatever. So that was it.
We know you very well from your characterisation of Syl in Doctor Who, but it wasn't actually the first villain you aspired to play in Doctor Who, which I heard on one of the extras from Mission to Magnus. Do you tell us about the first time you wrote to the BBC suggesting a recasting of one of Doctor Who's villains?
Yeah, well, obviously that was at the height of when I really liked Doctor Who. You know, I watched it probably for about 10 years, consistently every Saturday afternoon, and 12 years actually. And in that time, there was this villain called the Master, and I thought, you know, I really enjoyed that character. And when I heard that he'd been unfortunately killed, I immediately thought, well, I could be the Master. You know, we could, you know, he could have been made disabled by the Time Lords, but he's clever enough to have been able to get technology together. And I suggested to the BBC in a letter that I should play the Master, and especially as the Doctor by now had about 2 or 3 regenerations. So there's absolutely no reason why the Master couldn't have been transformed into somebody that looked like me. And also I suggested that he could go about in a sort of hover chair and fly around in that, which again could be equipped with, you know, a ray gun or whatever. So they didn't have to kill off the Master. They could keep him going, and I could play the part. And that was in the early 70s that I wrote. Of course, they wrote back and said, thank you for your letter, but no. They had various kind, soft excuses, but at the end of the day, it was still off. So I just thought, okay. And then round about the early 80s, when the Doctor was transforming from, I think, Tom Baker into Peter Davison. And there was a little competition in a TV listings program, the Radio Times, which said, so who do you think should be the next Doctor? Obviously, they didn't say if it was going to be Peter Davison. And of course, they didn't admit that they'd already got him lined up. They just wanted to get, you know, suggestions from the public as to who should be the next Doctor, as a sort of game, I suppose. And I immediately wrote in and said, me. So, and I again said that, you know, the Time Lords, having got so pissed off with the Doctor in his present incarnation, that they decided to restrict him, restrict his abilities to cause mayhem with time and space, so they would cripple him. And hence, that was me. Well, that was a bit too far for the BBC. And again, they sent me a very nice letter, but God. Okay, so that was my attempts to get into Doctor Who. I even wrote a story as well. And actually, by the time I became Doctor Who famous, Doctor Who magazine asked me to write a short story for the magazine. I did, and I thought it was crap, so it never got published.
Oh, is that right?
Their reasoning was that I hadn't written a story about any of the existing Doctors. And they said that, you know, we can only use recognisable Doctors in the stories. And since you've not been, you know, written a story that was anything like, you know, Hartnell or Troughton or Pertwee or, you know, up until Colin Baker, I think, because I wanted to create a brand new Doctor, number one. Secondly, I didn't want to use any of the assistants. And that was the other stipulation. You know, you've got to use a recognisable assistant. I thought, no, I want to create a brand new assistant. And my idea was that the assistant was an alien. not a human being. And not only that, it was an ugly monster type alien, but a very nice person, a nice alien who wanted to, the only thing is, this particular alien was never happy about the fact that the Doctor was always going to Earth to sort out their problems. And he said his complaint to the Doctor, or it, that every time he goes with the Doctor to Earth, they keep trying to kill him because he's an alien. So he hates having to go back to Earth. And obviously that kind of storyline, was not popular with Doctor Who magazine, with the editor. So that was it. End of story.
You were to write for Big Finish.
Well, I don't think Big Finish that interested in my writing. I don't have a lot to do with them except the couple of times when they asked me to do still.
So when you started up your professional theatre company, how old were you then, and what sort of jobs had you done before you got to Doctor Who?
Right. Well, I'd left university. In fact, I left university in 79. 78 to 79 was a period where me and my friend, Richard Tomlinson, co-founder of the theatre company, were plotting and making plans to get this theatre company launched. And it happened that we got it launched, within a year of me leaving university. At that time, though, I decided I'd go into advertising. So I left university, joined an advertising agency. But as a hobby, I was setting up the theatre company. We got an invite to go to the United States and to Canada in 1980. It was still an amateur company. The Brits were not interested in us at the time, only America and Canada. But of course, when we came back with a successful tour in the States, the Brits like anything that's American. So if you're successful in America, then suddenly, the sun shines out of your ass. And they became interested. And we found that before we went to America, we couldn't get any reviewers or critics, couldn't get any media interest in what we were doing, or just local interest. But when we got back, suddenly the BBC were knocking on our door, and not Channel 4, ITV, Channel 4 later, and the radio. And that was when they just decided to make documentaries about our theatre company. And we very quickly went from amateur to professional. And it was one particular documentary about us that launched me, because amazingly, various producers, casting directors, actors saw what I was doing in the documentary. Obviously, you probably know the story of Martin Jarvis, who was in Vengeance. It was his idea that the director should meet me and interview me and audition me to see if, I could be what they're looking for to play it still. But prior to Doctor Who, which was 1984, I had actually been working now as a professional actor for about 3 years. So I had done a movie, Walter, which was the first film that went out on Channel 4 in 82. And I got that part because of the documentary. And also, I'd been doing quite a bit of theatre, though the best work didn't start until the late 80s. So I got to play Hamlet and Jesus in Godspell. And in fact, most of the my best work has been in theatre. So I got to play Aztec, which I'd been wanting in Caucasian Short Circle, and I've been wanting to play that since the mid-70s when I first came across the play. And another favourite role of mine was Mac the Knife in Threaten the Opera. So, like Christopher Lee, when I was working with him in a film in 97 in Pakistan, he was in a film called Jinnah. His constant complaint was, I have been in 200 films and only 7 times did I play Dracula, but that's what I'm only remembered for, Dracula. And you could see that he was completely pissed off with this fact that that's it. That's all you can associate him with. And yet, as he said, he's done 200 movies. Actually, I would say that I was able to tell him, well, I remember you in Ivanhoe, and I thought you were fantastic in that. I also remember you in Gormenghast, and I thought you were brilliant in that. Very surprising. And I also saw you in The Wicker Man. So as far as I'm concerned, you are definitely more than Dracula. But I've got this horror that I will end up like him, saying, oh, I have done 200 parts in theatre, film and television, and I've only played Syl 6 times or whatever. I can't remember the exact number, and that's what I'm ever remembered for. No one remembers me playing Hamlet now, and I remember me playing Jesus, and I was a good Jesus, I was. That's my horror.
But you don't feel like that now, do you?
No. Anyway, I don't mind. I think Syl's great. I'm proud of Syl.
So how did that translate between the television episodes that you did compared to playing Syl for Big Finish on audio? What were the differences? Did you find it harder not being in the makeup to perform Syl?
Yeah, I thought it would be harder. Obviously, it's like how many years? The last time I played Syl on telly was at 85, and then Big Finish was something like 2008, the first one. So we're talking 20, 30 years gap between the Syls, and I was a bit worried about that because actors, they go on about, I need to find the shoes. Once I've got the shoes, I can find the character. Or once I've found the jacket, I've got the character. So it feels like, it's the uniform you wear that creates the character. And also, doing an audio without the suit, but also not being on a set, which helps, you to find the story and the character and so on. And then, of course, playing with other actors who are also dressed up. So I was very worried that I wouldn't be able to do it. I didn't have it within me to be able to just sit in a sound box, a sound booth, with nothing to feed my imagination. Well, obviously, I managed it somehow. I mean, I don't like looking at myself and hearing myself, but I forced myself before the Big Finish production to watch Syl on Vengeance and Mindwarp in order to, absorb this character and rediscover the voice and the psychology and the personality and soak it all into me, because I would need to bring it out again. So I had to suffer watching myself in order to do the big finish. And surprisingly, I mean, I've not listened to the big finish result. So I don't know how it works. I don't know how it ended up, because I've got this big phobia. But I presume that after I did it the first time and they asked me to do it a second time, it can't have been that bad. But they haven't asked me again. So maybe the second time I did it was shit. And they thought, no. And they've never asked me to do anything else in productions. So perhaps I was just rubbish. I don't know.
I didn't get a chance, Philip, to listen to Mission to Magnus before coming on, so I haven't re-listened to it. But I did listen to Antidote to Oblivion, which was the last one, just today, which, it was very good. So I think, I think there's definitely room for you to come back to the audio world.
Well, we'll just sit and wait. Obviously, it was fantastic to get the chance to play still in all his glory. There's the video that has just came out at the end of last year. Again, I was a bit concerned whether or not I would be able to repeat whatever it was I did way back in the 80s. But, actors are very insecure, neurotic creatures, and, they scare easily. And I have to learn to, pay no attention to my worries.
I mean, you have a very important place in the Doctor Who canon in terms of you are the recurring villain for the Sixth Doctor. You're the only one he meets twice, and then you go on to meet him again in audio. So you are the recurring monster for Colin Baker.
I know. Poor fella. I think he probably has nightmares of Sil. And I think he's hoping that I end up with another Doctor so I can nightmares. Actually, I learned something the other day. Which I've often thought of the idea that Sil should become a companion of the Doctor. And to my amazement, I was told by someone else who was interviewing me that there is Colin Baker actually talks about the idea of Sil becoming a companion of the Doctor. So, and I think that would be a great idea, fantastic idea, because I imagine Sil being a reluctant companion. You will have watched Lost in Space, I'm sure, and I would model Sil's behaviour on Dr. Zachary Smith, who is a reluctant friend of the family, is constantly trying to sabotage them, but everything he does always turns accidentally into the good and not the bad. And I imagine that Sil would be similar. Another character like that is in Lex. You watch Lex, which is a sci-fi. There's a sort of joint Canadian-German production. There was Tweedle, another reluctant companion on the spacecraft, who was in love with the main woman. Did you ever see Lex?
I haven't seen it. I've heard of it, but
yeah. Well, he's also someone who was not happy about being there, but it's always somehow or other he ends up doing good despite his best attempts to do bad. So that's how I envisage Sil in his relationship with the Doctor, if he was to have such a relationship.
just harking back for a moment to the last Big Finish story you did, Antidote to Oblivion. You mentioned in the extras that you thought the script was quite prophetic of its time, which was 7 years ago now. But part of the story of Antidote to Oblivion is the company trying to decrease the population by means of disease and viruses. So perhaps even more prophetic than it was 7 years ago.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. In fact, I think whoever is responsible for the coronavirus was listening to Antidote to Oblivion and thought, hey, that's a great idea. Let's do it.
Yeah, for sure. So how did that come about with the videos, Seal and the Devil Seeds of Arador? Were you hesitant on getting back into the role again on video? Did you have to be coerced into it?
Nah, I'm a tart. I'm a prostitute. I don't need a lot of persuading. No, but basically what happened was that Keith, the producer director of Still, he came to me because he was making a documentary about me for Mythmakers. And it was while he was interviewing me, he suddenly said, did I fancy doing, a spin-off about Still? And I said, yeah, why not? I said, you'd obviously have to see if Philip Martin was up for it, because I don't think anyone else could write Still. And obviously, Philip wouldn't be keen for anyone else to write about Still, write a drama. So I said, if you can get Philip to agree, then I'll certainly do it. And at that point, Keith was talking about another spin-off drama that he'd done, which was the one that was a sequel to the Damon's story. And he said, watch that and tell me what you think. So initially, we imagined that the spin-off would be just Still, and he's kind of talking to camera most of the time. I was a bit worried about that. I couldn't see how Still on his own would carry the drama and what kind of story it could be. But I wasn't going to voice that worry with Keith, because I was pretty sure that it would work out in a way which would be fine. And even if Keith said, okay, this is what we're going to do, and it is mainly going to be Still, as no one else really in the story, I'd do it, though I wasn't sure if it would work. But as it happened, Philip Martin was very enthusiastic about doing a spin-off, and then Keith told me about some of the developments that was going on in terms of the story and how Philip was progressing. And of course, when the script arrived, I loved it. And and we got to make it pretty quickly. I mean, it was literally about 2 years from the day that Keith suggested that I do a spin-off to when we actually cameras were rolling. It's like, less than 2 years, and that's incredible, really. And and the fact that it has won so many awards is also a testament to Keith and the production team, and obviously a testament to Philip, the writer. Because I think everything depends on a script being well written. That's the most important thing in any kind of film, TV, drama, or radio. And if you haven't got the script that's good, then the rest of it is just kind of padding and it leaves the audience, I think, unsatisfied. And of course, if you've got a great script, then there's a lot more that actors can do with it.
Yeah, and I was going to mention too, the awards are flying all over the place for that one.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, it's great. Let me talk for a moment about one other piece of your work that caught my attention when I was talking to you recently, and it's a book that you released a few years ago now, called Diary of the Absurd. And what stood out to me was the fact that you'd made a video trailer for a book. First of all, I haven't seen too many video trailers for books before, but your video trailer was very disturbing in a very David Lynchian way. Would you say that you've been inspired by David Lynch's work over the years?
Well, not just David Lynch. I mean, number one, I'm very disturbed sort of character. And I like surrealism. I like absurd. I like absurd theatre. And, I would say that my childhood was very much, or teenagehood, was very much influenced by Monty Python. And there's a lot of absurd, surreal elements to that. Cronenberg is another important influence, as well as Lynch. And also, though, I've had very strange, dreams throughout my life. And so, I think there's a horror and sci-fi, I think, has a lot to do with, how I ended up making that particular. You see, I actually made 3 videos promoting the book. So I don't know if you maybe only saw the one.
I saw 2.
Right. But you said that you don't see too many promos for a book. That was actually the 3rd or 4th book. The first promo I made was for my The First to Go book play. And that was very stark. In fact, it was banned by YouTube. And because it's about the Holocaust and the Nazi killing of disabled people. So, and I used, proper footage. And the ironic thing about YouTube banning it was that most of the footage that I used in the promo I got from YouTube. So it just shows you how stupid they are. And but happily, there are other video platforms on the internet where they're not so squeamish and so kind of Mary Whitehouse-ish. So I was able to, and I've still got them on a couple of video platforms, the First to Go one. And then another one that YouTube banned was my other book, The Ripper Code. And that's, again, on a couple of other platforms. So it's still available to be seen, The Ripper Code. And I can understand in a way, because The Ripper Code is about a serial killer of prostitutes. So there could well be some elements that's disturbing in that. So I've actually, I think all 4 books that I've got, I've made promos for them. But obviously I enjoyed doing the one, as you can see, that I made 3 for Diary of the Absurd, because and maybe again it's this kind of thing of enjoying editing, film editing. That is something that gave me a lot more scope for mad editing, because the subject matter It's all about absurd situations and nightmare situations and, um, prophecies, predictions of the future. So I enjoyed making that. And I still keep making I'm making a video at the moment. It'll only be about 30 seconds long. It's an anti-Trump video. And all it is about Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. But it's Trumpty Dumpty sat on a wall. So I'm doing an animated cartoon about him. And I got a friend of mine who's a singer and actress to do the nursery rhyme with the changed lyrics. So that'll be coming out maybe by the end of this week. But the YouTube did ban one of my videos recently, which was actually the Daleks and Trump.
And what was the premise behind that video?
Well, I was basically saying that the Daleks love Trump, and that he's an agent of theirs, and what they claimed was their objection was the fact that I used real footage of lynching of black people. And that I was obviously suggesting that if Trump had his way, he would be killing black people in America, or any other color that he doesn't like. So that was the premise of that, and it got banned. But again, I'm happy to say that some of the other video platforms, that and I are quite happy to accept it. So that's still out there.
I was going to say that there's a growing push for diversity at the moment. Do you feel that disabled people are being represented better in terms of diversity on television and film, or where are we to go with that?
I think, they have. We're seeing more of disabled people in film and television, but the problem is, number one, there's a lot of tokenism, and you will find disabled people as extras. They'll populate anything to do with disability, but you won't find them being the main characters. And if they are the main characters, it will be a non-disabled star playing the part. And despite the fact that we've been complaining about this for 20, 30 years or more, you still find BBC or Channel 4 or Hollywood continually casting a non-disabled movie star in a role which any disabled actor would give their eye teeth for. And they're still being kept, away from those choice parts. And I personally found, for example, The First to Go, which was a play that I wrote way back in '96 about disabled people being gassed in Nazi Germany. The gas chambers were invented originally for the purpose of killing disabled people. And then someone had the bright idea, hey, we can kill millions of Jews with these gas chambers, can't we? So then it was used for that. Now, I wrote a play about it, The First to Go. It took me 12 years to get that play on stage. But eventually, it did in 2008. I also, at the same time, got commissioned to write a film version of it, the British Film Institute. That was in '98 that I wrote the first draft. But then, unfortunately for me, the BFI was changed and turned into something else, or rather, a new film agency was created. And that agency stopped making interesting films and just went for Hollywood and commercial films. So the opportunity was lost. And but I carried on trying to get my script looked at. I did lots of changes, and then I was able to get various producers interested. They liked the film script, but they all had an issue with the fact that I would not allow the main disabled roles, who were the heroes of the piece, to be played by, I wouldn't allow non-disabled actors in those parts, because as far as I was concerned, that would be an own goal if I did that. It would be sending out a message to the audiences that, you know, disabled people are not capable of playing themselves in a major role, in a major film. So I said, no, that cannot happen. And every time I did that, they lost interest in the script. And that is still the problem that I have in trying to get the film made. So, you know, it's several steps forward, but at the same time, several steps back. And the main reason is because, you know, cinema and television are obsessed with making a commercial product. You know, when you get a movie that has got like $2 million spent on it, which is completely unnecessary, really. I made a film which was like 70 minutes long for 10,000 quid. I still paid the actors and the crew. I didn't pay them loads of money, but no one got paid loads of money. We all got paid exactly the same amount, which is like £50 a day. And I haven't been paid, of course, because I'm the writer and the producer and the director. My wife didn't get paid either, and she was, you know, did all the gopher jobs and so on. But the other creatives, all the other actors, and I was even in it as well, but all the actors, I made sure they all got 50 quid a day. And actually the cameraman, who was doing 2 jobs, unfortunately, though, because I should have forked out for a separate sound recordist, but he was a sound recordist. So he got 100 quid a day because he was doing 2 jobs. So really, you know, okay, I don't want to be making films for £10,000 at a time, maybe a little bit more, but I don't need to make a film for 200 million or 20 million or whatever. And if we could just, you know, reduce the, you know, the amount of money we need per film, and that's the problem. When you spend so much money on a film, you then have to try and get it back. And producers all over the world, but especially in Britain and America, you know, they think that, you know, the only way you can get your money back is to have Tom Cruise in it, or Brad Pitt, or, you know, any of the sort of great female stars, you know, Nicole Kidman or whoever, which is rubbish, especially when I think, you know, what they actually give the film is so insignificant. You know, the most important thing is the story of a film. And secondly, you know, the acting and the directing, the person playing. You know, most actors can do whatever Brad Pitt can do, and probably do it better. And you don't need to be spending $12 million for one actor. I could make 12 films for that money, $1 million each, and I wouldn't need to spend more than $1 million on any film. But you see, one of the problems with filmmaking also is that producers and the studios, they automatically get between 10 to 15% on the budget, and that is money up front. So clearly the incentive to have a $200 million movie and 10% or 15% of that is huge. You know, they're greedy bastards, and they want to maximize the money that they'll get for basically doing cool, actually. So and that's killing the film industry all over the world, but especially, in America and Britain. One of the reasons I love, foreign language films is because they don't have that problem. They're not interested in trying to reach the biggest audience because they know, if the film's made in Czech or Germany or Russia or China or wherever, they don't need to try to grab the American audience. And that has been, the curse. And I suspect the same is for Australia. Australians, unfortunately, speak more or less the same language as the Americans, just as we have this curse in Britain. But we speak the same language as the Americans. And consequently, our entertainment, our arts, the prime thing is that it's got to appeal to the American audiences first and foremost. And we can't make, ethnic films anymore in Britain. So, and that's the problem. It's money that's keeping, disabled actors out of, the interesting thing is, the more money you have to spend on something, the less opportunities there are. So, theatre, all my best work has been in theatre. Why? Because there's not a lot of money that's put into it, and they're prepared to take risks, and it's not their money anyway, it's government money mostly. So I'm more likely to get a phone call to play Hamlet or Mac the Knife or King Lear or whatever if it's theatre. But I won't get that phone call if it's for film or telly. And it's all because of money. Money has basically destroyed the arts, and it's encouraged greed and very little creativity. And the fact is, Keith Barnfather was able to make an exceptional film because it actually required less money. He was able to do it for far less money than if you were to try to make Spider-Man or Superman or any of the Ridley Scott films, the sci-fis. I think his films have gone down in quality the more money he has to spend for the films, quite frankly. And I would say that's the same for the film industry in general.
It's fascinating listening to you. I love to hear your political views coming through, and just your wisdom. I guess the issue, Brad Pitt doesn't bring a better actor; he brings a pretty face. And I think the industry is about pretty faces.
Exactly.
And when you've got money, you don't care about script so much. Whereas when you've got little budget, it all relies on the script. I think the reason why Doctor Who was so good in the early days, they had no money, but they had creative people writing creative scripts, and then good actors.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when back in the mid '80s, I coined this phrase "body fascism," and body fascism is the main thing that lubricates the entertainment industry, and the body fascism is greatest the more money involved. So you'll find that films are particularly cursed by it, and it is all about the look of the actor and actress, and pretty faces is what matters in film, and to a degree television has increasingly become like that. Happily for me personally, as an ugly person, I'm still able to get work in theatre, and that's ageism is another thing, but you'll find that there's a cut-off point for most actors and actresses in film, especially, and again to a degree television, that once they get to a certain age, and for women especially, particularly, there's a sell-by date, and it's all down to this kind of ageist, body fascist mentality, which is governed finally by money again. So an old woman doesn't bring in so much in the box office, or an old woman star. Though, older blokes are still, considered box office. So, Gene Hackman, for example, he if he was still working, people would still go to see a movie with him in it, even though, he's, about twice or three times older than the last great woman who is going to get a lead role. You still have to have beautiful women in the lead roles, but you don't necessarily have to have beautiful blokes. So body fascism and money, they're the biggest problems in the film industry.
Nabil, it's been fascinating having a chat with you about your life and about your career, and really appreciate you coming on to talk to us on the Sirens of Audio. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you for having me. I wish I could have been there with you. I haven't been to Tasmania ever.
So there you go. We had a nice long chat there with Nabil Shaban. Philip, your thoughts?
Well, what a fascinating man, and so honest with us. So appreciated his honesty, and certainly thinking about what he's passionate about. And I'm hoping that Big Finish decides to do some more with Syl. I really do think he's the Sixth Doctor's companion, or villain, main villain. And so it would be great for Big Finish to write at least one or two more stories with Syl, because I think he and Colin just play off each other so well. What were your thoughts?
I did put a post on a Facebook site asking for some feedback on Mission to Magnus and Antidote to Oblivion. So, shall we go through some of that now?
Yeah, what a great idea.
Okay, to start off the feedback, John Hall says, Antidote to Oblivion is far superior to Mission to Magnus, but that's not a very high bar to clear. I would tend to agree. I tend to agree.
Yeah. John Hogan, Antidote to Oblivion is better. Syl is great. Big Finish needs to have more with Syl. I agree with that.
Me too. Chris D. Winier says, Antidote is good, but without Syl it wouldn't be anything to talk about. Agree, we need more Syl. So lots of people want Syl to come back.
Yes, Kat Sunny says we need more Syl as well.
Thanks, Kat. Lucas Gabriel says, only listen to Mission. Not a great deal, but yeah, Big Finish should use some more Nabil. He was top class in the real-time movie that came out last year. And at the time of the release of this podcast, it's been almost a year since Syl and the Devil Seeds of Arador has come out. So there's been still getting awards for that thing. So it's a great piece of work. So congratulations to Keith Barnfather for that, and to Nabil for his performance.
Indeed. So Jim Kelly thinks we need more Syl and Frobisher. So
Frobisher is an interesting character to want to get back. I don't know if we were having problems with Keres on Earth. I'm not sure how many problems we'd have with Frobisher.
No, Frobisher's easy
stories.
because he's a changeling. He can be anything he wants, so he can change to something appropriate for Earth.
Fair enough.
I love Frobisher. I think Holy Terror and
the big talking bird.
The big talking bird, and then there's the crime one he does.
The Maltese penguin, wasn't it?
The Maltese penguin. Those two episodes I adore. So yeah. Anyhow, we need more Syl and Frobisher. I agree. Thanks, Jim.
So Dominic Sneok says, sorry, I hope I pronounced that as close as possible, Dominic. Don't like Mission very much, but Antidote is one of the best Big Finish audios ever. I adore Mr. Martin and his works. Syl is a great villain. So isn't it interesting, the contrast, written by the same author, people sort of across the board not enjoying Mission, but really, really enjoying Antidote.
As I said, I think it's partly to do with the time. Mission was written for the early 80s, and I think it feels like it's mid-80s, whereas Antidote to Oblivion was written 20 years later, and it feels like it. I think values changed. I think our attitudes have changed. And, I think the update that Mr. Martin's done has worked.
which ties in beautifully with the next bit of feedback from Alex Pass. He says, love both of them. Mission is very 80s. Just what we were talking about.
Yeah. So, Roddy McDowell, I thought that Antidote was a cleverly thought-out political allegory, and Mission didn't make sense to me. Why should Syl need ice warriors? Why when he could just employ mercenaries? Yeah.
And it's like I said, Philip Martin was given the brief, I think, that the ice warriors were to be in the story. So, in some ways, it feels like they were just plonked in there. But so thanks, Roddy.
I'm going to say I'm not sure Philip Martin really did the research he needed to do to make them work.
Yeah.
I think he just thought they were monsters.
Nigel Parry says, I enjoyed much of Antidote to Oblivion, and I agree with everyone that it would be great to hear more from Syl. I can't understand why he isn't being featured more. So that's getting quite a good petition together here, Philip.
It is indeed. Kent Allard, haven't heard Antidote, but would have probably liked Magnus a lot more if they'd done more with the Time Lord bully angle, and a lot less with the ho-hum Ice Warriors blowing things up angle.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, Kent, because that bully Time Lord does return in Antidote to Oblivion, but not in the way that you might expect. So, yeah, give Antidote a listen. I think you'll like it.
Well, thank you to those people for giving their reviews. It's good to hear. And good that it sort of matched up with what we were saying before.
Very good. Well, that's a good place to wrap up, apart from our recommendations. Philip, what have you got for us this week that you can recommend?
Well, I have been listening to the latest audiobook, Doctor Who audiobook that's been released. So I've been listening to Enlightenment. So it's written by Barbara Clegg. So she was I think she was the first female writer to write for Doctor Who. And I think she's also the first female writer to write a target for Doctor Who. So released many years ago, but it's just been put out. Interesting choice of narrator, Stephen Pacey, who people will know from Blake Seven as Tarrant. So they didn't go for any of the cast for Enlightenment, which seems a bit strange because they could have used Mark Strickson, they could have used Janet Fielding, they could have used Peter Davison. But yeah, they've gone for Stephen Pacey. But he actually reads really well. So yeah, it's a good story. I mean, I always loved it on the show. It's one of those target books that doesn't add. It adds some things, not a lot to the original show. But yeah, it's been good to have in the car and listening to, and the kids have listened to it too and enjoyed it. So that's my recommendation for this week.
All right, so my recommendation will be a podcast. I'm going to recommend one that I've listened to. I think there's a new episode out now, but the episode I listened to was a review of The Talons of Wang Chiang and The Unicorn and the Wasp. So putting them both in the same episode on the podcast Something Who. We've had Richard from Something Who on Sirens of Audio before. It was your first episode, Philip, when Richard was on.
It was.
And yeah, so they always do episodes with some kind of connection from the classic series and the new series. So there's two connections with the Talons of Wang Chiang and
Christopher
the Unicorn. Christopher Benjamin is one, and also they've got a giant animal. So giant wasp, giant rat. There you go.
Giant rat. Okay.
But yeah, I can't remember what they focus on. Whether they focus more on the animal. I think they focus on Christopher Benjamin as being the link between those two. So yeah, Something Who is a great podcast, and if you like the Missing Episodes podcast, it also features Paul Morris, who is in the Missing Episodes podcast. He is also one of the hosts of Something Who as well, so he's always really good to listen to, and a Big Finish author as well, written for Jago and Lightfoot, so he has a lot to say about the Talons of Wang Chiang. So thank you very much, Philip, for joining me tonight and for joining me on our chat with Nabil Shaban.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's great to have a good chat with Nabil.
And audiophiles, make sure you listen to lots of audio until you hear from us again, because you know why. It rocks!